to go over. First, I want to welcome you all and let you know that this is the second in our horticultural and folklore speaker series. The first one was about Hawaiian plants and people, and that was a month ago. It was in December, beginning of December. And that was really awesome, a great presentation. And this second one is Hollies, the crown jewel of the horticultural world, presented by Sue Hunter. So a couple of things I want to go over by now. We've already had a lot of Zoom issues, but a couple of things, if you could leave yourself on mute, unless you have a question or something to say, that would be great. We have a lot of people in here, so I don't think we're going to get to all introduce ourselves individually. The last speaker series, what we did is that if you wanted to put in the chat who you are and where you're coming from or why you're here, that would be great. It's a way of connecting with other people in the horticultural world. What I also would like to ask is, this is already recording, but if you don't feel comfortable with me recording it, I'm gonna have to edit it, obviously. I will turn it off. We just post them. We have a YouTube channel that we post them to so that people who missed it can watch it. And so if you don't feel comfortable, you can either send me a message privately, or you can just speak up, or just let me know. Just looking at all the things in the chat. So feel free to do that. Also, we will have, I know if whoever was at the last lecture, we have a little memento of the lecture that we will mail to you to your snail mail address. So some of you may have gotten a postcard from Kamele that she designed herself. You will get something from this speaker series, this lecture as well. So if you want to put your mailing address in the chat privately to me, that's fine. If you want to email it to me, you can do that as well. And my email is KateSGaller. I'm going to put it in the chat at gmail.com. Okay. So if you want to email you will get something in the mail after this event. Okay. 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 So we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce Sue. And Sue, sorry about that. Don't worry about it. Just you can just talk off of your knowledge and bring up your pictures. I'll do a real quick introduction because I'm going to let Sue talk about herself a little bit, because she's the expert and she knows much more. So Sue Hunter is the president of the Holly Society of America. She is the owner and propagator at her nursery, Heartwood Nursery. She focuses on native plants nursery. It's a native plant nursery that you opened in 1991, Sue, I believe, and a very large focus on hollies. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about yourself, Sue, so that I don't mess anything up, and so that you can expand upon what you do. So why don't you let us know what you do with your.
Okay. Can you enable me to share?
You should. Oh, there we go. You should be able to do it now.
Okay. Okay. So thank you for inviting me to speak. I always like to accept invitations to speak about my favorite genus, which is Ilex. Here at Heartwood Nursery, which I founded in 1992. We are all about hollies, 365 days of the calendar year. So the holly has been my life's work for a few decades now. Previous to my focus on hollies, I founded and I own one of the original native plant nurseries in the Mid-Atlantic region. I began propagating native tree and shrub species during a time where that type of plant was not really accepted in the nursery industry for use. So back in the late 70s and early 80s, the focus of the nursery industry was more on plants that did not originate here. And people just did not realize the value of native plants back then. So typically in the nursery industry, you would see a lot of plants like Norway spruce, Norway maple, plants that had been introduced here for decades, since the early 1900s and late 1800s, as transportation began to improve during that time. More people would go on plant hunting expeditions all over the world, and they would bring back plants that they thought would look nice in their gardens. Unfortunately, they were native to other areas.
Taking them to the same place, and these photos are from Chincoteague.
Kate, am I still on?
Yeah, you're fine.
So,
I hear other. Can everyone mute themselves?
Are we being hacked?
that you have the same name, the date, and so forth as before.
I don't think so.
So
Let's see.
these are not the only tools to use to get your images in. But,
No, you're
you
good.
know,
I see your pictures.
give some thought
Said
to what works for you.
Sandra isn't
You
muted.
know, take advantage.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, nursery focuses on plants, and the nursery industry tend to go in waves, and they tend to go in trends. And you see these trends for decades, like Japanese maples, some of the other non-native hollies, a lot of non-native shrubs that didn't originate here. So before the awareness about native plants was brought to the forefront, those were the type of plants that that nurseries propagated and that landscapers used primarily. So my colleagues in the nursery industry now, they'll come up to me at a show or something and they'll say, you know, that I did have foresight in foreseeing the demand for native plants, particularly to different regions throughout the East Coast. So I started focusing on propagating plants of the Eastern Piedmont region and transitional areas. And I've been around hollies my entire life. I grew up with hollies. I grew up not too far from one of the original holly nurseries that's pretty well known in the area. I always had an affinity to hollies, and my career just gradually progressed toward hollies. And then I just became obsessed. And once the obsession took hold, then I just have stuck with it over the years. Let's see. So I guess if I had to give myself a title, it would be that I'm a career woody plant propagator by trade. And it is my business. I am not a master gardener. I am not a hobbyist. This is what I do for a living. I am a holly farmer. And a lot of people who aren't familiar with the nursery industry also are not familiar with its many, many tangents. and many areas of expertise. So the field of horticulture and the nursery industry within the field of horticulture really can be comparable to the field of medicine, where you do see a lot of specialty fields and niche fields. And I don't have a lot of competition in my business, and that's for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is because I grow my own cutting wood, and nurseries have problems having access to significant quantities of cutting wood. So I propagate starter holly plants for the nursery trade, for the wholesale nursery trade, with a primary focus on Ilex opaca, which is the native evergreen holly. I also propagate other species of hollies, some native, some non-native. And I also propagate deciduous hollies like winterberry and possum haw holly as well. But most nurseries don't have access to a lot of wood, cutting wood to propagate. So that's one thing I have to my advantage, is that I do grow my own cutting wood. Another factor in that is that sometimes holly cuttings can be difficult to root. Unless you have years of experience, it's not safe to say that you can propagate holly cuttings for a year and you have the technique mastered. And that's because every propagator is working with different situations as far as water pH, soil pH, climatic differences. So nursery professionals really have to perfect working with the conditions that they have at hand to propagate. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But the first picture is titled, and again, I'm sorry for the wording on the picture. I did take screenshots of the PowerPoint presentation yesterday, just in case there was a problem, and I'm glad I did that. But anyway, the first slide is called, "And in the beginning there were hollies." So hollies date back thousands and thousands of years. The holly is very sacred in multiple areas around the world, and it has been used in rituals that date back thousands of years. So in Europe,
Sue, hold on. You're muted. Ay, ay, ay. Can you unmute, Sue? You're on mute.
no,
There, you're good. There you go.
okay. So hollies were thought to have magical qualities because they remained evergreen after all the other trees had lost their leaves. So when you think about the cyclical nature of holly, it's the opposite of deciduous trees. So hollies don't shed their leaves until the springtime, which is completely the opposite of trees in the fall that shed their leaves in the fall. So when people would go for a walk in the woods, or the rest of the woods was leafless and barren and cold, and they would come upon this beautiful evergreen tree with red drupes or berries, they would naturally attribute magical properties to the tree. So they would bring holly branches into the house to provide a haven for fairies in the winter time. It was said that the spines on the holly leaves were the true crown of thorns, and that the red drupes represented the blood of Christ. It was considered bad luck to burn holly. And holly wood was supposed to keep evil thoughts and spirits away, because they would get trapped inside the thorny branches. It was also considered unlucky to burn holly wood before Christmas time. So let me go on to the next slide here. I can get this.
So Sue, while you're doing that, I'm just going to say Sue said it's okay if people have questions during the presentation to ask, or you can put it in the chat as well. I see one in the chat. I'm not sure. In my woods here in Maryland, holly's coming up everywhere, turning my dying oaks into evergreen wood, question mark, question mark. Not
Well, I'm not sure what the last part of that question means, turning the dying wood into evergreen wood, but hollies, birds love holly berries, especially robins and bluebirds. So as they eat the berries, they naturally disperse the seed when they roost in the trees at night. So if you live in the vicinity of a female holly, that has produced a lot of fruit, the birds will naturally move in. And like I say, when they roost in the trees, they will disperse the seed on the ground. And that's why you have hollies coming up, which is a very good thing. So the top slide, hollies have been used in gardens and landscapes and revered in their natural environment for centuries. So the picture on the top left is the original plant list, and from the original landscape design by Samuel Vaughan, who designed the State House Square in Philadelphia in 1785. And that's the block where Independence Hall is located. So if you can see, the arrow on the left points to where he listed 92 hollies to be used. And then the second arrow, he specs 1 winterberry and 1 ilex glabra. Why in the world he spec'd 1 each of those species, I have no idea, but I thought this was very interesting. So hollies have been used for centuries in the landscape. So the picture next to that is a page out of a book that I have that was written back in the early 50s. It's called Hollies by Harold Hume. He lists noteworthy hollies in this book. So all around the Mid-Atlantic area and up and down the mid-coast and a little bit into the Midwest, there are many large, noteworthy historic hollies. And in the Holly Society, we really try hard to keep track of such historic hollies. Unfortunately, they don't all get continuously preserved. This one is a picture of the Indian Steps holly in York County, which is about 20 minutes east of my house here in my nursery here. We just visited this holly last weekend. It doesn't look as good now as it does in this picture that was taken almost half a century ago, but it is still hanging on. It is reputed to be very centuries old holly. So sometimes people, in the public, when a tree like this, when a witness or a legacy tree is being preserved, they tend to love it to death, and they think they're helping the holly by doing things for it. And in reality, the best thing they can do is let the professionals take care of it and just admire the holly from a distance. Okay, so I thought the next part of the talk, I would just kind of go through the calendar year here. So we're just going to begin now in January. Some of us have seen a lot of snow. Some of us have not seen any snow at all. Others have seen a lot of ice. So the picture, what to do when you have a large holly or a large tree like this and it gets weighed down by a heavy snow. Well, the best thing to do is to leave it alone. Holly wood tends to be very brittle in the wintertime and will snap off, especially if it's very cold out. So it's best to resist the urge to take a broom and knock all that snow and ice off. And again, it's best to not try to help the tree and let the snow and ice melt naturally on its own. So the holly pictured on the left, this could be one of the only opaca crosses, Ilex opaca crosses. This is Ilex opaca Chief Paduke in the Holly Society. We do believe that it is a cross between two of the native hollies, which is unusual because hollies seldom cross outside of a controlled environment because their blooming times are all different. And that is when pollination occurs, is when the male and female flowers bloom at the same time. But this Ilex opaca Chief Paduke on the right is just covered in ice. And as tempting as it is to try to help it along, again, the best thing to do is just leave these things alone. Okay, I'm going to try to get into the next picture here. Am I still connected? Hello?
You are connected.
Okay, I wasn't
Yep.
sure.
You're good.
Okay.
Everyone is very obedient and muting themselves. But if anyone has a question, do feel free to unmute. I see some people are putting it in chats too, so we'll talk. Some of them we can talk about at the end more.
Yeah, so the top picture is during the winter time. Now is a very good time to prune hollies as well. Another good time to prune hollies is during their summer dormancy in August. We do a lot to hollies in August here at the nursery, but I can elaborate on that a little later as well. So the top left picture is a winterberry holly. It's a dwarf winterberry called Stoplight. We just pruned this last week, and as we pruned it back, and hollies are very, very forgiving. They love to be pruned hard, not necessarily every year, but every couple of years they love to be pruned hard, and we really just whacked the heck out of this holly. And as you can see, the lower branches have bent down onto the ground, have been covered by the pine bark mulch and the soil over the years, and they've all naturally rooted into the ground. So we did cut them away from the parent plant, and we'll dig those up to repot or relocate in the nursery. So before we prune something very heavily like this, since I do propagate hollies from drupes or seed or the berries, we do collect the berries off of the plants when we take cuttings and when we prune hollies hard like this. So you can see the bowl full of berries down there in the corner, and they will be stratified, which means exposing them to mimicking Mother Nature and exposing them to different conditions in order to aid in their germination. So the bottom two pictures are the only two pictures on the slideshow that I did not take. I'm always impressed by these two pictures. They were taken by Dr. Jim Resch, who is the taxonomy and research committee chair in the Holly Society. And he took this picture of an Ilex coniana, which is the coney holly, in his backyard. And this is what we call hat racking. So I'm sorry the picture isn't bigger because you would probably be able to tell a little bit better, but you can see the pile of branches down in the lower right-hand corner of the pictures and how he has just completely cut the ends of the branches off and left what appears to be a skeletal hat rack. And the picture on the right-hand side is that holly that recovered 1 year later. And I think Jim's on the presentation tonight. So if he wants to put something in the chat, something further about these two pictures in the chat, that's fine. But hollies are extremely tenacious. They bounce back. I've seen, some of you may be familiar with the Nellie Stevens holly. I've seen Nellie Stevens holly cut completely to the ground, a 30-foot holly cut completely to the ground, and in 2 years, you just can't, it's 10 feet tall. You just cannot tell that it was ever pruned like that. So while you don't want to do this severe of a pruning every single year, it is good to do this to rejuvenate them every 4 or 5 years or as needed if branches begin to cross or the holly is in a line of sight, like a driveway or a window or something like that. Okay, so let me try to share this next picture here.
Has anyone else out there ever done that to a holly that you can share? Just chopped it, hat racked it? It's a brave thing to do.
It is a brave thing to do. And you just have to, tell yourself that you know what you're doing and that you're not going to hurt the holly. People are usually scared to death to even prune just the tips of the holly, but they really are very forgiving. Okay, so we're into early spring now, and this is a picture of my greenhouse in the upper left. And in the very early spring, sometimes sooner, depending on what part of the country I start shipping to, we start getting our holly starter plants ready to ship to wholesale nurseries. So this is a picture of us preparing the flats or the trays of hollies for shipping. So as far as areas that we ship to, it's Florida all the way up to New York. And I did ship some Ilex decidua, which is the possum hall holly liners. I shipped them to Texas this year. So that's about the extent or the range of the shipping that we do. And wholesale growers, people come here, they see the nursery, they've never seen a wholesale nursery before, and they say, wow, look at all these hundreds and hundreds of hollies. Well, wholesale growers, it does not pay them, it is not cost effective for them to buy just a few hundred hollies. Several factors go into their decision to buy my product from me. One of the decisions is how well the economy is doing at that time. Another factor is their faith in how the economy will be in a couple of years. And the third factor would be what kind of year did they have financially before they invest in a product like this? Because hollies are a long-term crop. Most wholesalers will take a holly starter plant like this, they'll pot it up into a 1 gallon, they'll let it grow in the 1 gallon for 2 or 3 years, and then they'll transplant it out to their field in a concentrated bed. That means the plants are planted fairly close together. They'll be separated out of that bed, and then they'll be transplanted again into the field several feet apart, grown on for another couple of years, and selectively harvested before they are sold. So this really, you have to be in the nursery business for life if you want to see a return on a holly crop. So we ship UPS and we pack the liners in boxes, as you can see in the picture on the right. So I did mention before that hollies, evergreen hollies, Ilex opaca, and the coney hollies, which is another species that I grow. It's a non-native species. They shed their leaves in the springtime, and they always shed their previous year's leaves. So it'll be the inner part of the tree that is bare for a while. So just as you see the new growth pushing on the tips of the holly branches, all of the leaves start to turn yellow and they will fall off. And usually in the Holly Society, we get a lot of questions on our Facebook page, or some of our members get a lot of phone calls, and people will say, what is wrong with this holly? It's dying. It is not dying. It is going through its natural leaf shedding process. And talk about scary. Nothing is scarier to see an entire holly orchard that looks like this picture on the lower left, where all the leaves are turning yellow. Everything looks raggedy. It really does look like the tree is dying. Sometimes if the holly is a little bit under stress, or if it's had a hard winter especially, all of the leaves will drop off the tree, and then you will start to see the new growth on the right push. So that is scary. Sometimes the shedding is so heavy in my holly orchard, and the upper holly orchard is about, I think it's about 4 acres big. We can stand at one end of the orchard and look straight through the orchard and see the road. And that is scary. To me, that's scarier than pruning. Okay, so let me get to another picture here.
So I'm going to put the website for the Holly Society of America and for your nursery in the chat now. So.
Okay, so the upper picture is what the holly orchard looks like in July to August. So if you remember the yellow shedding leaves in the previous picture, then in a few months, it is completely recovered and it's nice and lush and green. Now, one of the triggers, I believe, for hollies attaining their color is the shorter day length. So usually after the summer solstice, hollies will start to harden off a little bit. And then when they go into the summer dormancy, especially if it's a very hot summer in July and August, they will attain this gorgeous, gorgeous, very lustrous dark green color, as you can see above. So also in the summertime, the holly orchard will attract many, many different types of insects. Now, I did not put them all on here. If you go to our Facebook page, the Holly Society of America, and click on photos, you will see photos of butterflies, frogs, many, many different types of insects that live in a holly orchard. My favorite is the bowl and doily weaver spiders in American holly. Especially on hot, humid mornings, you can walk out into the holly orchard and you can just see, I mean, some of the trees have dozens of these beautiful spider webs in them on the bottom, in the bottom 2 pictures. And then the picture on the lower right, you can see the actual spider in there. And as you all probably know, spiders are just a great beneficial insect to attract to your garden and your orchard, because they eat so many invasive pests. All right, so we're going to go to the next picture. Okay, so late July into August is when we usually start our holly cuttings. The top picture, there are 2 pictures there. The picture on the left is a picture of perfect cutting wood for Ilex opaca. That's the American holly. And the second cutting is a picture of a very centuries old legacy witness historic holly tree that I've been asked to propagate. Obviously, the good wood is what we prefer. It's extremely difficult to propagate some of these old legacy trees because just as people are, when people get older, they cannot reproduce for a variety of reasons, and holly cutting wood is the same way. That tissue just becomes old at the node. It becomes less viable and less likely to develop roots, even with rooting hormone. So holly cuttings, people, they ask me all the time, where did you learn this? Where did you learn this? Okay. I did not read a book. I did not read the literature. I don't believe in reading literature about how to do a cutting. I believe in following my own sense about the plants and about what the plant needs. I've had a few mentors along the way, namely older people in the Holly Society that I love to talk propagation with and can talk propagation with on a level that most people in the nursery industry cannot. But the science and art of doing holly cuttings is probably about 35% science, and the other 65% is intuition. And that is what I follow every year since I've been doing this. We propagate between 10 and 15,000 holly cuttings a year, and it's a dying art. And I wish I have one good employee right now who is extremely interested in learning the old ways and learning the intuitive ways. She's 21. She just graduated with a degree in environmental science, and she's been with me since she was 14. So I hope, I know I won't be able to keep her forever, but I hope she stays around for another couple of years. So these are the ladies doing cuttings here in the upper right picture. And then the bottom picture is my greenhouse, my propagation house that I designed specifically for woody plant propagation. And I do use intermittent mist, which you can see in the bottom right-hand picture. So you can set the intervals and you can set the duration of the mist according to what type of crop you have on the bench and what stage that crop is in. I also have bottom heat on these benches. I do not use the bottom heat year round. I only use the bottom heat as needed. All right, so let me see, get another picture here. Am I taking too long?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, so the upper left-hand picture, woody propagation, this is the final product. Usually I propagate the starter plants in peat pots. That's what my customers prefer. This particular holly happened to be propagated in a deeper rooting pot just because I wanted to see how it did, and it performed just fine. And I did mention too that I propagate a lot of other native species, native trees and shrubs. This is just a flat of spice bush seedlings that happen to germinate along with the hollies when they were rooting this summer. So I do collect all of my own seed. This year was the very first year I have bought seed in, and I bought in a couple of different types of native seed just because my sources did not produce this year. But I pride myself on collecting all of my own seed. Sometimes, you know, I'll go into the woods. We have a lot of different hiking parks. We live very close to the Susquehanna River. There's tons of trails. Sometimes sometimes I'll come across a sycamore tree that looks extra special, and I'll pick up a couple of seed balls from that and bring them home. But most of the seed I collect is right here on my property. So this is winterberry seed on the bottom left, and this is Ilex glabra, which is the inkberry holly seed on the right. And we do hold on to the seed for a while until it just starts to deteriorate. The pulp starts to deteriorate a little bit, and we put everything into a plastic bag. We add vinegar or water to that, depending on the species, depending on what it is. We let it ferment for a while. We try to get the pulp off the seed as much as we can in the plastic bags. But we resort to lots of different means to get pulp off. Nothing mechanical. We do everything by hand. Sometimes we'll use an old Foley. I have various boards with different sizes of wire screens on them. We'll rub the seed with the pulp in it over a wire screen. We just improvise and we try different things until it works. I discovered that trash can lids work really well to separate seed pulp from the actual seed itself. And you can actually drain the pulp off first and leave all the seed in the main part of the trash can lid. So nursery people, I don't call them nurserymen anymore because I'm not a man, I'm a woman. So, and I don't really like to say nursery woman. So I'll just say nursery people are extremely innovative, and we're tenacious as the plants we grow because we have this desire to figure out what works, because we want the environment to have these plants. We want our customers to have these plants, and we love to educate people about these plants. So the question is, what is the potting medium I use for my propagation? Well, I don't use a potting medium, I use a propagation medium. So I use different things. For the hollies, I'll use 50% peat moss and 50% perlite. A lot of people like sand. Sometimes I will propagate cuttings in straight sand. The flats or the trays get a little heavy after a while. I know people that propagate in just straight perlite. That gets expensive after a while. As long as you have good porosity in a propagation mix or a seed starting mix, you should be successful, because you don't want water collecting around a seed unless it's a water loving plant like Acer negundo or sycamore or something like that could spend weeks in the water before propagating. But that's what I use. Okay, so let me get to another picture here. All right. Okay, so the propagation usually takes us into the fall. And I did mention insects. So this is another example. The bottom right picture is a holly loper. Most holly, and I really hate to call them pests because they're, all insects are food for birds. So they do serve a purpose. And they usually do not cause the demise of a holly tree. But sometimes you'll go out into the holly orchard and you'll see these holes in the margin of the leaves, and it is the result of this holly loper right here on the underside of the leaf that turns into a fairly nondescript moth later on that of course, birds like all of these. The picture on the bottom left is a picture of yellow-belly sapsucker damage. Now, yellow-belly sapsuckers are birds that resemble woodpeckers, as most of you probably know. They make horizontal rings around trees, and they can cause extensive damage, if not the demise of the tree. Once they start moving in on a tree, it's usually indicative that the tree is already in some type of distress internally that we cannot see, because they're going after sap, and I believe they also go after insects as well. So like I say, they're a threatened, or they're a protected species in a lot of areas. So not that anyone would do anything to harm them, but I really just don't know, the best way to control them would be to try to scare them off like you would crows in a vegetable garden by hanging pie plates in a tree or something like that. But damage such as severe as this in this picture, the tree is either already dead or it's very close to dying. I'm going to go back because I think I missed a picture here. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. So that's the one I missed. And the top left-hand picture is a picture of the native praying mantis, which is the native Carolina mantis. And a couple of years ago, we had already started to cut winterberry to make our wreaths to use in our wreaths. And I have a little retail store here at the nursery, and we sell holly and greens and winterberry. And the ladies kept bringing these winterberry branches on with these cases. And I was really happy to see that they are the cases of the native mantis. I mean, frequently you see the big bulbous cases of the Asian mantis, which aren't as beneficial as we think. But this is the native mantis. So I was very happy to see that we do have populations of those. I do have honeybee hives in all of my holly orchards here. This is a picture of the honeybees bearding or just collecting outside the hive, trying to keep the inside of the hive cool on a hot day. Honeybees are one of the main pollinators of hollies. There is nothing that smells any better than a holly orchard when it is in full bloom. The fragrance is almost intoxicating. And as I mentioned earlier, holly species bloom at different times of the year. And in order for pollination to occur, there needs to be a male holly of the same species blooming at the same time as the female of the same species for pollination to occur. Now, sometimes pollination, you think all of the factors have been met, but sometimes pollination does not occur. Sometimes if the wind, hollies are also pollinated by wind. If you have a row of boxwood or some low plant in front of the holly, sometimes you'll notice that the holly just got berries on the upper half of the holly and not the lower half. Sometimes it will rain when the hollies are blooming and they won't be pollinated as much. Sometimes we'll have a late frost when the hollies are blooming or right before they bloom and the flowers die. So there can be different reasons that hollies don't get pollinated. Sometimes I'll get a question, people will say, well, why doesn't my holly get berries? Well, that could be that you have a female with no male around, or you could have a male tree as well. So usually when we answer pollination questions here at the nursery and in the Holly Society, we need to acquire as much information as we possibly can from the person who's asking the question. Also, many of you are probably aware too that winterberry holly blooms in different stages. So we have early blooming winterberries, we have mid-season blooming winterberries, and there are late blooming winterberries. Now there is some overlap as far as bloom time goes. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you definitely need a late male for a late female, because sometimes a mid-blooming male can bloom into the later blooming male period. So usually when I get customers that come into my store, I suggest that they plant a couple of males, especially if they have the room to do that, to ensure pollination. And male hollies can be very, very attractive, even though they do not get berries. The pollinator for Nellie Stevens holly, which is Edward J. Stevens, is a very, very, very handsome male holly. So male hollies are quite attractive in the landscape. So this is just a picture down below here of the diversity within the species Ilex opaca. In my career as a plant propagator, I doubt that I know any other genus that genetically expresses such diversity. There's so many different leaf shapes, leaf types. This is an uncommon variegated American holly. There are a few in collectors' gardens and arboretums. These are leaves from 3 different American variegated hollies on the lower right. So because the holly is such a diverse species and has so many genetic variations in it, that is how selections of American hollies are made. So usually when seedlings come up, or people, people who have an affinity for hollies, they notice something different about it, or something special about it, or it has a huge leaf, it has a bigger berry, it has a very bright red berry, some outstanding visual characteristic or growth habit. And they will select that holly, they will propagate it by cutting, they will take it to a plant auction, like the plant auction that the Holly Society has every year, or they will give it to a niche or a specialty grower like myself to propagate. And we will distribute these hollies to see how they perform. And if they perform reliably, then that person usually will register that holly with the Holly Society of America. So that's how new selections are discovered. Let's see if I can get in here. Okay, so in the late fall, into December and Thanksgiving, like I say, I have a little retail shop here. People love holly. We give various holly wreath workshops. They're very popular. We didn't do it so much this year because of the COVID. In fact, we didn't do it at all. We just put wreath kits together and sold the wreath kits. But it is a fun way for people to learn about the different hollies and to design their own wreaths. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to try to move move through the next few pictures fairly quickly here. I just really like to say there is a holly for every situation and every garden and every landscape. People are so surprised when they see the different shades of green and the different textures of holly. Especially winterberry, there's a lot of variation in winterberry berry color. They look good with fall blooming perennials such as the winterberry with the New England aster. The picture in the upper right, I have this one particular Coniana holly up here in my nursery that when the new growth emerges and just after it hardens off, the foliage just looks black in the center, and it's quite stunning. As I mentioned before, winterberry holly, even males are attractive. This is a little dwarf male winterberry that I introduced and registered with the Holly Society about 8 years ago. It's a dwarf male. I named it Ilex verticillata elfman. I discovered it in the woods in an area called White Marsh, Maryland. It's fairly difficult to propagate. Some of the dwarf winterberries do not propagate very easily, but it sure does a good job pollinating. And then people are familiar with the English holly as well, which isn't really hardy in my area, which is zone 6. It's hardier out on the West Coast and in zone 7 around here in Virginia, toward the coastal plain, Delaware, but it is not native here. Okay, let me get to another picture here. Are there any other questions? Okay.
There are a couple in the chat about disease, but we could probably address those at the end if that's okay.
Okay. So holly, like I say, the berries come in many different shades of red. Occasionally, I think it's 1 every 2,000 seedlings will have a tendency toward a yellow berry. This is an attenuata holly in the upper left-hand corner called Longwood Gold. And in the background, that's Ilex verticillata Mary Jo, the red berry, which is another winterberry holly that I registered with the Holly Society about 20 years ago. So I just noticed a few words on the last question about can a female cultivar pollinate? I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but all of these selections that I'm mentioning, just because you give a holly a name doesn't mean it's the straight species. It was just selected out of the wild for some outstanding characteristic. So with hollies, most holly selections are wild hollies, and they will pollinate other hollies in the same species. So the picture on the upper right, that is Ilex verticillata stoplight. That is how the holly looked before we pruned the daylights of it last week in one of the earlier pictures that I showed. This plant is 30 years old. It's about 8 feet wide.
You are on mute, Sue.
We had to prune it back fairly hard.
I can hear you, but you're very quiet.
So not only do hollies look beautiful with berries, but the foliage looks nice with deciduous trees in the fall. So the lower right-hand picture is a picture of the lower holly orchard with Cornus florida, Acer rubrum, and on the right-hand side, Taxodium distichum, which is a bulb cypress. So they really can be accent plants. and mixed in amongst deciduous plant material. So the lower yellowberry holly, that is Ilex opaca canary. It's one of the oldest yellowberry hollies selected. It's extremely hardy. I find that the yellowberry varieties of American holly, not only do they root more consistent and faster, but they also have minimal shedding in the springtime. Most of the time, hollies, plants that have less pigmentation in the fruit tend to be a little bit
Hey, you okay?
and tend to be a little bit weaker and don't perform quite as well, but this really is the exception to the rule here with yellowberry hollies. And then the lower right-hand corner picture, again, it's just a mixture of hollies. This is a low growing Ilex opaca called Clarendon spreading with a Mary Jo winterberry, Atlantic white cedar in the back, and the red twig dogwood on the left-hand side. So let me change that photo here. We have two more pictures. Okay, so we mentioned that birds love hollies. Not only do they like to eat the berries, but there are a lot of birds that build nests in hollies too, because the spiny leaves protect the babies. So these are baby robins. We have robins that build tons of nests in the hollies. This is another picture of the yellowberry American holly. This is a picture of winterberry. This is behind the pollinator meadow here at my farm. This is probably about 30 or 40 different winterberry hollies, and you can just really see what a statement they make against the dormancy of the other plants. So before COVID hit, and my husband and I, we do like to travel to different parks. I like to go to old cemeteries. I know it sounds crazy, but you find some awesome hollies in cemeteries and at different national parks and different historic places. There's some beautiful, beautiful hollies in the old Gettysburg Cemetery. This picture in the lower left-hand corner is a picture of a very large, beautiful female holly at Monticello. That this picture was taken last year. The kind of peach or orange, kind of salmon berry holly, winterberry, that's a selection of winterberry called Winter Gold. Honestly, the color of that berry changes from week to week. It is very beautiful, planted just by itself against deciduous trees. The birds don't seem to prefer the berries on the yellow fruited hollies as much as they do the red fruit. The berries, in any case, the berries have to attain some degree of fermentation before the birds sense that they are ripe and they will eat them. So, and this is just Ilex opaca on the bottom here during the first snow that we got a couple weeks ago. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Holly Society now. Let's see. Okay, so the Holly Society of America was founded in 1947 by some very dedicated nurserymen in the Millville, New Jersey area. It was founded actually as a way of preserving Ilex opaca. It was founded originally to bring awareness of the plight of people cutting down hollies at Christmas time and just, plundering the native holly in the woods, and bringing about an awareness that we need to save these plants, and trying to educate people about hollies. It grew into a much broader organization very quickly, because holly is native to every continent in the world except Australia and Antarctica. There are hundreds of species of hollies worldwide in Asia, Europe, South America, and North America, and not so much in Africa, but there are hollies. There is one native holly in Africa. So over the decades, university professors have developed, an affinity for plants, botanists, horticulturists. They study holly. Many worldwide arboretums have large collections of hollies. They are registered as Holly Society of America collections. We are also the universal registrar of selections in the genus Ilex. As I mentioned before, anytime a new holly is introduced to the nursery trade or to the horticultural world, the person who is introducing that holly has a choice to register it with the Holly Society of America. Those registrations are handled by Mike Ponte, who is chairperson of our registration committee in the Holly Society. They have to go through a submission process, and then samples are sent to the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. They are preserved forever in the preservation area that is shown in the lower left-hand picture, the herbarium. They're pressed and preserved in files in the herbarium there. So the one holly, I think, is actually a 100-year-old sample. So there are thousands and thousands of selections of different hollies. There are very few publications written about all these selections. There is one book called The Genus Ilex. It was written by Fred Galley, who was a past member of the Holly Society. The continuation of that book, which is entitled Beyond Galley, is updated and kept by our research and taxonomy chairperson, Dr. Jim Resch, in the Holly Society. So I just want to emphasize that the Holly Society is a wonderful organization. We are a true botanical organization. We have novice growers, we have gardeners, we have people who just like plants, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where we have professors at universities as members. There are different Ilex collections in different arboretums throughout the country. It's just truly a wonderful organization to belong to. And I do encourage people to if you don't want to join the Holly Society, I do encourage you to like the Facebook page, the Holly Society of America. And then maybe you'll decide to join later. We just came out with a new newsletter that we publish twice a year. It has all kinds of handy tips on it for gardeners and professionals alike. And we do publish a more formal Holly Society journal twice a year as well. So I think I'm about finished. So if anybody has any questions.
I know there were a couple questions in the chat. There's one there's two about disease. The best resource for learning how to care for ailing older American hollies. I have a 40-year-old tree that became very ratty looking by the end of the summer for no apparent reason that I'd like to diagnose.
Okay, well, another good thing about the Holly Society is you can go to our website, which is www.hollysocam.org. And you can click on ask the executive secretary or ask a question. And you can ask the question, any question about hollies. It will go directly to our executive secretary, who then will forward that question to our panel of holly experts. So anytime you ask a question about hollies like that, we do suggest that you include as many pictures as you possibly can to help us answer your question. You can also email me at heartwoodnurseryinc.com, and I am always very happy to give out advice and answer questions like that.
And I did put both of those in the chat earlier, the Holly Society and Heartwood
Yeah.
websites. So the other one was also about disease or aphids disease. So maybe that would be the same answer. Beautiful 30-year-old hollies that have had heavy woolly aphid infestation, treated with neem oil many times, and lacewing egg larvae. The aphid soot is pretty bad. What can I do to get the soot off the leaves? The trees are 50 feet tall. What can we do?
Yeah, so I'm thinking she's probably referring to the sooty mold fungus. The best thing for that is the horticultural oil, but also good air circulation. A lot of times when you see the sooty mold fungus, the branches are very tight. There are other plants planted around it. If you could prune it or thin it out, it's really hard to say without seeing the condition of the tree. But I know when you improve air circulation, that really tends to help that situation.
Are some Ilex opaca selections grafted? I'm thinking of Cedar Hill, for example.
Now, and that's a really good question. I mean, all these questions are very good, but that one in particular is very good. So people used to graft hollies before cutting propagation became somewhat easier to attain with the new tools we have to work with in greenhouses today. So grafting is a very old way of propagating hollies. I would not suggest it right now because you tend to run the risk of that understock growing up around the graft union. You tend to run the risk of incompatibility occurring at the graft union. And Cedar Hill, the selection Cedar Hill is that's I root about 10,000 Cedar Hill cuttings a year. It's one of the easiest selections to root. So, why frustrate yourself? Are there any other questions?
Yes. How are you noticing the impacts of climate change on which hollies grow where, as with many plants right now?
So let's see. I prefer to use the term environmental change as opposed to climate change. Hollies are really adaptable as far as the climate goes. But as far as environmental changes go, the holly Ilex opaca is a threatened species in the state of Pennsylvania due to loss of habitat. I know that Ilex opaca comes up like weeds in other states in the Mid-Atlantic area, but loss of habitat is the primary concern right now. Oh, okay, so somebody else is asking, do I have a favorite inkberry that stays fuller? I like Ilex glabra compacta. Also Shamrock is a really good selection, and that's, both of those selections have been around for a long time. And then the dwarf winterberry collection. I tend to stay away from dwarf winterberries for the birds. Stoplight is probably one of the smallest winterberries, but the berries are huge on it. And the only bird that I've seen go after those berries is a mockingbird. The robins don't even like it. Some years they don't even touch the berries on the dwarf winterberries because they're so large. And I just don't know whether they ferment to that point that the birds like them. But usually the birds prefer the berries on the larger winter berries.
Okay, there's another question. Is there a holly that is not hardy in our area that you wish you could grow? Wish list.
Oh my. Well, one year we went to, the Holly Society takes trips every year. We didn't take one last year, and we're not sure about this year because of COVID, but we visit locations all around the country. And a couple of years ago, we went to South Carolina, where we went to a garden that's owned by a man named Pearl Fryer. And he just has the most amazing garden down there. And he grew Ilex vomitoria in the garden. And we had some of our Southern members that presented educational seminars at that meeting in South Carolina. And their topic of discussion was Ilex vomitoria. So Ilex vomitoria is a native holly to the southeastern part of the country. It is not hardy around here, and I do find the plant very attractive. I like it.
Okay, here we go. Is it okay to prune inkberry now like other evergreen hollies?
Yes, but I wouldn't prune it as hard. I wouldn't take as much off of it unless it were in the way of something. It would be slow. You can prune it hard, but it would be slower to recover.
Okay.
As far as a male glabra, that's a really good question. We talk about this in the Holly Society all the time. The only male glabra that I have is not it just doesn't have very viable wood. So a lot of the growers in the Holly Society are trying to sow Ilex glabra seed now to hopefully, hopefully some of that seed will produce a more vigorous male that we can start to take cuttings off of. Unless somebody knows of where there's a male glabra in the wild that we can go and get cuttings off of, presently, there is no good source for a male Ilex glabra. And yes, Ilex verticillata elfman will pollinate. It's an early male, so it will pollinate early females, like Mary Jo.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anyone? I just want to say thank you so much to Sue. And also, I definitely apologize for all the glitches at the beginning and the link and everything. I'm not quite sure about the link. So I'll check into that. Some people said they could get in and some people couldn't. So I do apologize for that. And that won't happen for the next one. Sue, thank you so much for all your knowledge. I definitely found out things I did not know a lot. And also, I never introduced myself at the beginning. My name is Kate Taylor because of everything going on. I'm the programming coordinator for Women in Horticulture. We do have 2 more in this lecture series. The next one is in February, the beginning of February, with, I just need to pull it up. It's medicinal plants. And there's one in March, the beginning of March, by Kim Andrews, who's doing symbolism in Japanese gardens, symbolism in meaning in Japanese gardens. Those are on our website and on our Facebook page. And we do post on Instagram about them, just to let you know. But the links are on our website and Facebook. And we will make sure that all the links are working. So thank you so much to Sue. Thank you to all of you for joining us. And remember, thank you, Julie Bear, who is the director of Women in Hort, posted in the chat the link to the events. Thanks, Julie. And thank you for joining us. And do remember that if you send me your mailing address, either via my email or privately in the chat, you will get something in the mail about this talk. And if you were at our last talk, I hope you got something in the mail from that. So Sue, thank you for offering your time. That's
You're
kind
welcome.
of thank you so much, because that's how we run Women in Hort. We're a very small grassroots organization. We are a nonprofit, but we're run by all of you. And if Julie or Terry was on here, Terry Donahue is also on the board of Women in Hort. If you guys have anything to add, please do. Or if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to ask. The resources. I know that some of you are asking about resources. So I did put a couple of the things that Sue mentioned in the chat, and we will have this Zoom on our YouTube channel, hopefully after a little editing at the beginning. I didn't realize I was recording. And it'll be on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Sue.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for, despite the technical difficulties, for rising to the occasion.